Thanks everybody for being here. My name is Justin Harn. I'm the Executive Director here at OpenSignal.
Woo.
Thank you. All right. Tonight we're very excited to introduce the public facilities and resources we offer in support of community-driven experimentation in virtual reality and other immersive media. This work's been incubated for many months by Matt Henderson of Portland Immersive Media Group. Matt, if you're in the house, could you stand up?
He's in the room.
He's around somewhere.
He's in the
Okay.
corner.
Exhibit.
Matt, in the cosmos or universe, wherever you are, thank you for all of your work on this amazing project. Matt has been customizing our studios, experimenting with VR applications in our space, and collecting gear from HTC, Native Instruments, and Valve. Thanks again to Matt for all of his work, pulling all this amazing stuff together. OpenSignal is a unique public media and technology resource funded primarily by the Mount Hood Cable Regulatory Commission. We're a body of the city of Portland. We provide access to people, space, and tools that empower communities to tell their own stories. We offer a public library of professional media equipment, training, 5-channel TV distribution, media programs in schools, a fellowship program for Black filmmakers, and so much more. We focus on serving those whose voices are underrepresented in the mainstream media. Providing the community with access to new technology like VR tools is key to our work. Some upcoming VR programs of note at OpenSignal. We're offering 3 adult classes this spring and summer teaching Unity, a game engine software that you can use to create immersive environments. We're also offering 2 VR-focused youth summer camps in partnership with Saturday Academy. All of these classes will be taught by Matt Henderson, and you can find them listed on the classes and events section of our website. We also now offer rentals of our studios to media professionals, and we offer personalized media trainings for businesses or other groups. Learn more about us in the annual report on your seat, and please make sure to investigate the space while you're here to see all we have to offer. You can also talk to me or any of our OpenSignal staff members or panel members after our events. Thanks to Design Week for the incredible promotion. Really, really appreciate that. And huge thanks to Kareem Hassanein of Bora Architects and Liz Rhodes of ZGF Architects for your incredible vision and hard work bringing this necessary and timely event to life. Thank you so much. Now I'd like to hand off to our facilitators for the evening, Kareem and Liz. Thank you.
Thank you, Justin. Once more for Justin. Justin's incredible. Well, as he said, my name's Kareem Hassanein. I'm a board member here at OpenSignal, and I also work at Bora Architects, running one of the exhibits you'll be seeing here tonight. And I just wanted to say a couple things about context for this event. First, you may have noticed this is a recorded event, so there's cameras live. And before we get started, just a little bit of context for what we're discussing. So we're talking about democratizing access to immersive technology. And we're also talking about democratizing access to the placemaking and development process, which has historically marginalized a lot of people. The design community now is coming to a deeper understanding of our role in confronting those issues of marginalization and oppression, but transparency and access are huge. And how can these new tools and emergent technologies allow us to make those processes more transparent? That's what these panelists are going to be talking about so eloquently this evening. So I'm going to step off the stage, hand over to Liz, who's going to moderate this event, and I'll be back up here later for some Q&A. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Liz Rhodes, and I'll be your facilitator tonight. I am a board member also at OpenSignal, and I'm at ZGF Architects. So, and before we begin, I would really like to introduce the artist behind the goggles, Alex Chu. Alex will be actually documenting and illustrating our panel discussion tonight. So our words and our thoughts will be captured in VR forever. So before we start, I would really like the panel to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about why they're here and who they work for.
Oh, that's me. My name is Laura Loforti. I'm the co-founder and co-director of the Vampor Mosaic. We are a memory activism platform, and so we amplify, honor, preserve, and present the many silenced histories of our region in order to understand our present and create a new chapter where possibly we can all belong. We amplify many histories, but we are here specifically to explore the history of Vanport through VR. And I don't know how many of you know about Vanport. A lot? You know a lot about it? What do you know about it? Now, I will just give you a quick summary, and then I invite you to come to the Vanport Mosaic Festival, May 21st to June 2nd, where we do lots of placemaking, and by the end of it, you will know all about it. Vanport was a city built in 1942. It was a temporary city built for addressing pretty bad housing crisis in Portland, so certain things never change. And they built an entire city in 110 days to house the shipyard workers and their families coming from all over the country. It was a multiracial, multicultural community. At the height of the population, there were close to 100,000 people. And in 1948, there was a flood that in one day destroyed an entire community. And this community and this history has been erased, literally, but also metaphorically. And so our collective of artists, historians, educators, media makers, building on the effort of the families of the Vanport survivors, have been active since 2014 in exploring these histories in a way that it's meaningful to the Vanport community. And so we'll talk about this experiment.
My name is Riddhi De Cruz. I'm originally from India, and I've been in Portland since 2010. I'm currently one of 2 co-executive directors at a local grassroots nonprofit called City Repair Project, and Todd over here is on our board. Yes. And we identify as a placemaking organization where our mission is to foster thriving, inclusive communities through the creative reclamation of primarily public space, but really kind of working on that edge to blur the public and private divisions of land. And another thing I'll quickly say is that I'm really grateful to be here on this land that is Chinookan and many other tribes, native tribes, who are recognized and unrecognized. So thinking about memory activism, really speaking to their names so that they can be here in the room with us. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I'm Todd Ferry. I'm the Associate Director and Senior Research Associate at PSC's Center for Public Interest Design. This is an organization that tries to explores using the tools of design and architecture to serve traditionally underserved populations through community engagement and inclusive ways. A lot of my work most recently has been around issues of houselessness, and I'm a co-founder of PSC's new Homelessness and Research and Action Collaborative.
My name is Charles Kelly, and I'm an architect and urban designer, and I came here in 1991 to work at ZGF Architects, and I've been there ever since. In my time there, I've sort of learned the value of how you make neighborhoods that serve the interests of the communities who live in those neighborhoods, and we've sort of been evolving and helping over that time figure out ways to connect with communities and find out what shared interests they have, and then come up with concepts that those communities can appreciate or test in various approaches in shaping their neighborhoods. And over these later years, we helped to create eco-districts, or the idea of the eco-districts, where the buildings and the open spaces work together to serve the community using precious little resources that we have with higher degrees of resiliency. And that seems to be what we're doing now in our business.
My name is Jeannie Lai. I'm a principal at Bora Architects. I'm here to share sort of our experience with VR internally and externally. In the last couple of years, we are really interested in understanding new technology and how it affects our work. So, yeah, and we're here also to share, we're part of the exhibit, a project that we did internally called Water Avenue Yards. It's kind of internal sort of what if a project that we did a few years ago, and we've created a virtual model for you guys to experience. So, Thanks for having us.
Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to start our questions first for our community organizations. And I really want to speak to you all and for you all to tell everyone here tonight how your organizations address placemaking. So Laura, we'll start with you tonight.
Sure. So I mentioned that the city of Vampur was destroyed by a flood. And when I mean destroyed, I mean that there's nothing really left. So I told you there was a city with almost 100,000 people living there and making community there, and there's nothing left. If you go there now, it's a park. It's PIR, Delta Park. There is a dog park. There is a racetrack. There is everything but this history. And if you don't know that this happened, you wouldn't even see the little remains that are there. So placemaking is crucial to this story because it's we attempt to make visible an invisible story. Our community is still here. The Vampur community, they're still survivors. They're in their 80s, 90s, 100, and they're our communities. We work with them to tell their story, to reclaim their history. And so placemaking, it's hard because we don't have access to that, we can rebuild it. And we take over the space and the site on Memorial Day weekend to commemorate the day of the flood. So this year is going to be May 27th. And we take you around. There's guided tour, bus tours, walking tours, bike tours. We have exhibits. We have oral history screenings. And so it's our attempt to remember for one day. Our memory activism is year-long. And our approach is really to preserving history with the community while it's still here. So I'm excited to explore this is our racial history, this little detail. Vampur history has an incredible legacy for who we are today. And so it's not just an attempt to it's not a chapter in our history book. This is our living history. And unless we truly immerse ourselves in this history and make meaning with those who experience it, we don't understand why we are where we are. And I'll let you decide if it's a good place or not.
So I would say the interpretation that we have at City Repair for placemaking is kind of threefold. One is that through this act of empowering citizens, whether that's a group of neighbors or a school or a church, like we just work with various people, even businesses, so across sectors, to really feel empowered in place. And therefore it's that act of reclaiming one's relationship to a certain area, and whether that's where you live, work, play, and kind of have that come alive, that relationship come alive. And then the other aspect of it is that this belief or this notion that a sense of belonging happens by that connection with that place and all its inhabitants. So it's both the ecological world as well as the human realm, having both those elements play into one another. A third element that I'm gonna talk about a bit is like differentiating between placemaking and place taking, and also place keeping, where a lot of what I hear with the Vanport Mosaic is placekeeping. Like this was a place dear to a whole bunch of people whose a story doesn't get to be shared often, and so keeping that story alive is a form of placekeeping. And place taking in the sense that without really knowing the varied stories of a place that have existed since time immemorial all the way up to present, then we can quickly replicate patterns of settler colonization and domination, and just come in and view it a particular way and say, oh, this is placeless, or we want to have our creative input on it without truly giving honor and respect to the stories that have brought this place and make this place what it is now. So kind of a multi-layered process of reclaiming one's relationship to having a place in society and in the world, and then also having a relationship with place that is held in common with others.
As we're speaking about place, I was told if anybody would like to come in and sit, we still have a lot of room. So please come and sit if that's the case. We talked a lot about, while we were building this event, everyone up here really hasn't had an experience in VR. Not many of us have. This is a new technology and it's a new frontier. And Laura actually is one of the only individuals on this board who's been able to experience using VR for telling stories in part of this exhibit. So I wanted to take the time and ask you, you've called yourself a story midwife for so long. We really want to know about how did using this tool, how did this change your approach to sharing and document, especially Vanport's story? And what do you see the possibilities for your specific project moving forward?
So it's mind-blowing, first of all. We've been working on this for not even 3 weeks. So what you're gonna experience in that room is really just a taste of what's possible. And our framework is really based on very strong values. So as a story midwife, I recognize that these stories are not mine. I'm not the one telling stories. I'm the one supporting those who experience the stories to share it in the way that honors their own experience. So that's my framework, that's my value, that's my work and my passion. So in experiencing this technology, as I tell story with and not about people, lots of ethical concerns came about, and that's really the struggle of working with someone like me. I'm very slow in making decisions because I feel a very strong responsibility in what we do with other people's stories. And so we didn't have the opportunity to bring in, as we usually do with our projects, the real experts, the Vanport residents. And so in a way, I limited what we could do just because it is a responsibility not to play with other people's stories. And I really appreciated how everybody involved in this experiment has been so thoughtful, Matt and Sharita and Karim, it's a beautiful collaboration based on the same values. So because it's an invisible history, of course, it's kind of an obvious place to recreate something that doesn't exist in a virtual space. And I can only imagine what would be to work with the community to recreate a virtual museum of what Vanport was. And we have enough stories. We've been collecting oral history for 5 years now. So we have about 50 short documentaries and hours of recordings and photos and everything that people donate to our project. So that's an obvious possibility that we do preservation through this technology in collaboration with the community while still here. So that's one possibility. Then there is a whole other possibility that it's almost even more exciting to me, that is the imagination that comes with this technology. A project that actually I'm doing also in collaboration with Alex. We're doing a series of story circles with the elders from the Vanport communities, where we are using their story and their lessons of resiliency to create a blueprint for a new community that is based on what worked in Vanport. Vanport was a multicultural community, a multiracial community where people who never lived together had to figure out how to live together. And they had housing, they had jobs, and they had childcare. So there's lots of what we call a very fertile ground for a healthy community. And so we've been working with the community to envision what those lessons could be today. So, I mean, as we go through, and Alex has been painting these incredible artworks, really, of these ideas and inspirations that are coming through a collaboration with the Vanport community and young people and city representatives and many people who sit and listen to these stories. And my dream now is also to imagine what would look like to create that city that we are dreaming together in a virtual space. And what if we can all see ourselves in it and then commit to create it? Yeah?
To do that, there's so many workshops and opportunities to speak with the community and to do it right. And there's an art to that facilitation. So the success, what makes a successful workshop when you work with community members and designers to create that successful outcome? And do you see that VR could help facilitate a better connection between designers and community members?
Yeah. In the placemaking process, I mean, one of the things is that I think we've done a real good job at hiding the fact that all of us are inherently designers and have been as long as we've been human, right? Like everybody knows how to create their own habitat. Everybody wants to decorate their room a little way. Like we're all just, there's a way in which we want to interact with our spaces that show our love and appreciation and a sense of belonging and collaboration with them. And I think that in more modern times, we've lost that sense of empowerment. And so I feel like potentially what VR can offer is that flattening of these specialized tools being, first of all, in 2D space. I can say that, you know, as someone who kind of straddles the community building world and the design world, and being a social scientist myself, that not everyone understands a plan view, like a bird's eye view, because that's not our daily experience of space and place. And so bringing things to life in 3D space is one way that when a community member is saying, this is the story that represents my community or represents my story, or this whatever it is, like a memorial or whatever that is really, you know, alive for the community members. Having VR tools can bring them literally to life in 3D space. That's one. Another can be that oftentimes I've felt this experience of saying something, like communicating in, you know, just through dialogue or conversation to professionals who have tools that you don't yourself have access to. And so then the designer is like, oh, okay, and then draws something and then hands it back to you, and you're like, that's not what I was imagining. And, you know, especially with some of the projects that we're talking about, there's limited budgets for community engagement. There's not that much more funding gets allocated to the professionals and the design expertise rather than asking the community what they want. And so another way of bridging that gap of like, no, this is actually what I mean is potentially if it's in live time and space, kind of like Alex is doing right now. So then you can project it or draw it and say, is this what you mean? Is this where, do these words capture the entirety of, like, not the entirety, but like what's alive right now? Am I doing this justice? It's a way to reaffirm the community member, like, I'm listening to you and I'm not going to go behind these closed doors and then draw something that doesn't fully reflect you. And yeah, I think that those are some of the ways in which I see this, the word I'm going to use right now but doesn't seem that appropriate, but flattening or kind of bridging between the community members and the designers so that it can actually feel more like a contemporaneous process of imagination, of reimagining what is possible, and then kind of compiling that all together and then seeing how things line up. Is it this multi-layered storytelling process of like bringing a place alive? Are there potential kind of things that can come into conflict that we can like we can be like, oh, we're seeing that, you know, we might have a different visualization of how this rolls out, and you don't need to discover that a little bit further on in the process. So lots of potential.
Yeah, there's so much potential. There's a piece of the process that takes a lot of learning. and how to do this well. And I think that for generations before, it wasn't part of architecture school and design schools. And Todd, you're so heavily involved with the work that you're doing for the Center for Public Interest Design and teaching at PSU. I want to pick your brain a little bit about like the transition and how you, as a practicing architect and an educator, what is the process of teaching designers, and how are you teaching them about inclusive practice and perhaps even the tools that they're using?
So at the Center for Public Interest Design, the work that we do is predicated on an inclusive and community engagement, right? And that's the way we get to an outcome. We're looking at it a few ways, including a graduate certificate in public interest design, and we bring it into architecture studios. But more to the point of how do you teach it is through real-world application, and we emphasize that you don't just engage for the sake of engagement. You're trying to have it be a meaningful experience. Because who we're looking to work with are underserved communities, these are folks who often feel overstudied and underserved. And so the tools that need to be created for that engagement to be meaningful need to recognize that. And so what I mean by that is that the process needs to be transparent. One thing about the types of projects that we work on, and I think a lot of people here might work on, there's a good chance they fall through, right? When you're working without a lot of money, they might fall through. So if you're asking time of people to come, to engage with you, and then the project falls through, then damn it, then the process needs to be empowering. It needs to be empowering. And so with the right tools, with the right design process, people can be stronger for it, and their community can be stronger for it. But without that, then you've wasted time, you've lowered expectations, and then another group's going to come in, and the same group is going to say, we have answered these same questions 5 times before, right? So, a tool like virtual reality, maybe it has the potential to address some of these. As part of this recognition of a need for transparency, maybe it is a chance to have people catch up. It's a chance to, if you're having a series of engagement workshops, but it's a different group showing up every time, or new people every time, maybe it's a chance to catch up. Maybe it's a chance to get on the same page a lot faster and hopefully reach that kind of empowerment that you want out of one of these. So if the project doesn't come through, the process did, right?
We talked a little bit while we've been rehearsing this a lot and getting people's thoughts. We talked a lot about like the adoption of tools, and can you speak a little bit about how, like, who is actually pushing the newest and greatest tool? We talked a little bit about like the change, like when SketchUp first started, but how is VR, like what is your thoughts of VR and who's pushing it?
Well, I'm not sure in architecture school it's pushed that hard yet, and I think that any architecture students in the crowd, or architecture grads, okay, you learn it's feet to the fire. They learn on the fly, and virtual reality is an additional thing to add on top of that. So it's an extra ask of the designers. It's an extra ask of the community to learn about it, and so. It's a little bit unclear, but if it proves itself to be a really meaningful way for something like engagement, that would be amazing. I brought this question up to some of our the fellows that we work with, our student fellows, about like virtual reality. Do you see a role for it? And it started out very skeptical, and they hadn't had experience with it other than maybe gaming. And then pretty soon they started to recognize a lot of potential applications, and some of them started to then explore it on their own and think, yeah, yes, I see that. One particular student was recognizing that charrettes, which are the gold standard of like a practice of getting people together in a short amount of time and working together, right? So it's a really consolidated, brief period of intense design, and then the ideas go off and they're brought back in design by the designers. What it doesn't allow for is kind of ongoing conversation, and for those people who can't make the meeting, but a virtual reality world stays in place even if a meeting room closes, even if someone has to work, but they could make it at 3 a.m, but a charrette's not going to be then. So these are the kind of conversations, and then students who get enlivened by these ideas will take them up on their own. But in terms of in my world, I'm not teaching virtual reality, but good.
Yeah, it's good for people to know the difference between school and practice. And as we really move through and talk about practice and putting into place conversations with community, one thing that I discovered while talking to Charles about the history of ZGF and this project, we actually found out that one of the founders of ZGF, Wolf, designed Vanport. And we've come a long way since then, where I'm sure that there was no community engagement when they put that place together. And so Charles, I want you to talk a little bit about practice now and the projects and the change in how we work and how we listen and sort of walk through with communities in the planning process.
And I think I mentioned that I came to ZGF in 1991, and from there till now, one of the big observations is in 91, there was still a feeling that you could walk with a community in a neighborhood and sketch in front of them about what changes might occur if this plan were adopted, or these policies were adopted, these goals were met. And there were visual preference surveys because nobody thought that 40 dwelling units an acre could ever look as scaled as the best neighborhoods people had in their mind. And you had to be able to get to what people had in their mind. I think and we innovated something called neighborhood walks at the city of Portland from 91 to 2000, where they would do neighborhood walks with the community before they even started the plan to say, okay, what are the feelings in the neighborhood about what's shortcomings, and where could we put, essentially, 40 dwelling unit an acre buildings, which would seem relatively small by our challenge today. Today, because of all of the rapid pace of change, particularly in the West Coast, there are a lot of feelings that are much laid on top of just what the expectation of what the place I'm going to live in. And a lot of those feelings have a lot of anger. A lot of people are in trauma. People don't have time to even come to a community meeting anymore, where in 91, it was a lot of people were showing up from different backgrounds. Now it's mostly people who can afford the time. And so what we're finding is we're having to go and meet communities where they are, and we're having to spend a ton of time with them, sorting out, moving past their feelings to what kind of actions they would take and who on their behalf they would accept an action from. And oftentimes it's not the city. And so we have a lot more nonprofits, we have a lot more place-keeping, making kind of concepts now, which we are folding into our processes. And in that, I think if I were to talk about VR, I think that VR is about, as Todd was saying, it's a way to memorialize all those feelings that people had. And maybe VR is actually just representing the places that people want, but also the places they don't like, or they feel they're not accessible to them, which is a big part of many of the people who are displaced, is the places that they once were in are no longer places they feel comfortable. And then there's all these places that they have to live in that aren't providing the services when they be displaced to what we call anchor areas, where they don't get the services that they used to have that were culturally significant. So I think it's a bigger issue now. It used to be kind of in neighborhood by neighborhood, but now it's like a whole region. Like, people who used to live in Northeast are now moving to the Numbers and beyond, or to Vancouver, or moving out entirely. So the story in our work now is to embrace, the scale of what a district or a neighborhood or group of neighborhoods can do for a community, and how you spread and share resources, and how you get people to talk about sharing benefits and costs equitably in placekeeping, in placemaking. And I think that we're having to tackle that. I think we're all having to tackle that in the profession.
How would we use VR in one of these community workshops? Where's the best use of it?
I like the idea of what we're modeling in the room when we're place keeping. You know, we're showing what it was and trying to tell that story of the past. What if you showed a future that was based on many of the feelings in the community, and you started to record a virtual city that everyone aspires to, and that the entrance fee in the virtual, you know, to being a player in the virtual world, you have to make investments that are wise in the real world. Mm-hmm. You know, maybe there's some test, and maybe Bitcoin and blockchain and new governance structures and, you know, all these things can come around, but we do need a virtual world to explain the goodness of a shared responsibility. Mm-hmm. And that tool, I think, is really important.
Rudy, we talked one time a little bit about recording and why recording is so important. Can you talk about why it's so experienced in your organization for community-centered design?
Yeah, I think, you know, where do I begin? One reference I'll make is that historically, secretarial, like note-keeping, meeting minutes has predominantly been the labor of women, and it's been a way to kind of, I would say, condescend or say like that there's something less with this aspect of just record keeping. And I've felt in my own practice as a community organizer that it can often be a really vital bridge for accountability that comes into play when, especially when you're working with communities that are more oral culture based, right? Good record keeping, the written word is really powerful. And so a way in which, you know, to etch into a document like, hey, this was said, we took on this action item, and we need to follow through. Like that's what I mean by accountability, like a way to kind of commit oneself to whatever action was said we would be taken. Like Todd was talking about how often, you know, even with the transparent process sometimes, which is again really important to like document all those different perspectives, which meeting minutes and record taking and documentation can do. But then also I think pulling some of this discussion out of just this virtual kind of abstract space and into actual impact. Like how does this play out on the ground? And I think that's where I've seen meeting minutes, like, you know, just reminders to be like, hey, you said you would do this and it's not been done. So are you gonna hold good on your word? It can be a really simple but elegant way for accountability.
Accountability and action. Jeannie, you have been actually testing VR, and you have been putting this into action. So I want to talk a little bit and ask you what the process has been like for Bora as designers through this exhibit, and also some of your R&D efforts.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think architects are generally excited when it comes to new technology. I think partially because we are, you know, tasked to think about the future in our work. I think at the same time we're also skeptical, especially because we're not technically that savvy. You know, we go to school to learn how to design spaces and experiences. We don't go to school to design tools. We react to tools. So, you know, emerging technology like this, like VR, for instance, you know, we don't know what to do with it when we first sort of get it, right? We're kind of like, oh, this looks really cool. What do we do with it? And I think it's been, we've been testing it at Bora for a few years, and internally we've been using it as a design tool, just, you know, looking at the design together with our teams and sort of watching that as it evolves and checking, you know, as a check kind of thing. And I think that's been successful. I think externally, when we bring it to clients, we think there's this idea of really engaging our clients into part of the building and having them understand in three-dimensional what we're doing. and sort of sharing it with them. And I think we've had mixed success in that realm. We've, I think, partially with the gear and also the control, the interface, the user interface is still pretty clunky. And so I think especially with clients that are, that we work with that are in senior positions and, a little older that aren't as facile with all of the technology, they some of them try it and sort of give up in, like 10 minutes or they get frustrated. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in terms of making that more engaging as a tool for everyone. I think for this effort, we were working on that. I think this gave us an opportunity to try some new things that we haven't tried before. So we use this program called Unreal Engine, which is more of a gaming software, not so much as an architectural software that we're very familiar with. And we have great people like Carrie, who's been in our office, really passionate about figuring out how to use it and spending a lot of time. And I think, with Unreal Engine, you can get some real physics, like materials look more real, like glass looks a lot more real, right? So, and things like that, also the little things like you can get trees where the leaves start to move. So you're really kind of creating an environment that's much more real, as you experience, and it's part of the whole design, right? We as architects think about those things. We have sort of abstract ideas, but we can kind of picture what it is physically in the real world, what it's like, and I don't think our clients often can do that, right? So I think, working with this tool, I think there's something to sort of step forward in creating something that's way more engaging than we've been sort of using. The sort of more regular architectural software isn't taking us there yet.
You mentioned a little bit about at first clients are tentative about using it because it's a new technology, but once they do, how does it help support like a stronger team or partnerships? How could it?
I think, as architects, our work is inclusive of a lot of people, right? We have consultants that are engineers that aren't, as facile with sort of spatial making, and I think, it's a language. I think somebody said that earlier. It's we take those abstract ideas and we can picture them, but not everybody else can, and it's almost like a disconnect, right? Lost in translation as we try to explain what we're trying to do to somebody else who doesn't have that skill set. I think, VR having that as a common sort of physical reality to react to for everyone, I think that's a potential that we, haven't had, where I think somebody earlier mentioned, like, we're asking clients to look at a plan and they don't really understand. And we've had oftentimes when we finish and complete a building, I'm sure Charles had the same sort of experience, the client comes back and say, oh, now I really understand what you were talking about. I kind of understood it, but I never really did until, this. Yeah, and that was like 4 years later when the project gets built, So I think there is a gap there that between how we communicate and share our design thinking and thought with people who are, that's their space, that's their home. They should understand it better than and taking our word for it. I think there's a gap there that really there's a power in VR that, as it develops, could really be powerful.
Laura, you were on the client side of this with the Vanport piece. You were working with artists and not architectural designers. You were working with artistic designers and technology designers. How do you think the process moving forward that helped strengthen those bonds?
Well, it's very much similar to what we've been exploring. I mean, we all speak different languages. I also literally speak a different language. So it helps to be in a space together and see what we are talking about. So it's definitely an incredible tool. I also see it as a tool of participation again, where people can see what we're going to do with their stories, literally. And I was just thinking, in terms of the other histories that are erased in the layers of erasure, right? And I'm thinking I'm involved in many conversations in terms of what we're going to do in the space, right? And often with a good intention and without community engagement, we are thinking, well, we could build this to commemorate this history. And without considering that in the effort of honoring a community, we are hurting once again another community that's more invisible. So I'm also thinking in terms of how we can create partnerships where we make decisions collaboratively in a space, again in a city, but also in this instance really in a physical space where there's nothing, and we can together decide how we can honor all the histories together. And so imagining it in a virtual space and then being able to present that to the city where everybody's involved in the conversation, I think is also very exciting. It's a different way of creating partnerships.
A question for the designers. I'll start with Todd. While we're learning a new tool, there's also a lot of outcomes in work sessions and charrettes that are hard to communicate no matter what the community or the stakeholders. Can you talk a little bit for both Todd and Charles about the pinch points that are in the workshop charrette process?
Yeah, and I think one thing is consensus building and the language that we use to get there. And how do you know when you've reached consensus? How do we know that we're talking about the same thing? And listening to the conversation, so much of what we're talking about around virtual reality, up till now, because virtual reality is new to me, these are the exact conversations we'd have around tactical urbanism. And for those of you who don't know it, it is an act of going out, doing something temporary as a proof of concept in the landscape. So this might be if you want to see a bike lane in your city, then you get straw bales, you do a paint stripe, and you try it out. If you want to see a street closure, then you do it, and you ask yourself, wouldn't this be great all the time? Or an installation of some kind. And in a lot of ways, that's what this is. Tactical urbanism, it requires a built effort. It requires an investment, a time, but you're spatially located, and you can stand with people. And although it's not a final product, if you're working toward a larger vision, it could be a catalyst. But you can also look around and say, this is what we're talking about. This is what we mean. Is everybody on the same page? How does it feel? And there's obviously that has its own burden. You don't want to take away from larger efforts by these smaller actions. But something like this really might have that. So in terms of the pinch points of a normal charrette, something like the consensus building, speaking the same language, whenever you can build in those tools or those abilities to share something spatially and reach consensus, then you've succeeded, right?
One of the pinch points is the transition from an idea or a concept or an approach that the community wants to take, and then how is that memorialized to in an institutional way in a plan that's held by various policies and regulations at the city, or the regulating, and it moves quickly to a regulating body to make something happen. And in some ways, when it moves to the city, the community loses. They may have advocacy, but now they're just in a critique role. Now they're just saying, well, the city, you didn't do, this doesn't look like anything we want. I mean, that may, so I think the pinch point is connecting whatever aspirations are in the community and building some continuity of expression of those ideas and interests through the permitting phase, through the incremental over 50 years or 20 years of development that's going to realize this plan. I think the real value of that pinch point, that transition, might be helped by VR if VR is memorializing some of the key moves in the community that they don't, this is the bottom line, if we don't get these, we're not going to have a neighborhood that's serving our interests, or it's going to displace people, or it's going to do something, or let's see at this milestone what happens. And at this point say, do we need to make an adjustment? Not having to go back to the whole plan and change everything, but just slow the process. The community has a little more power to say, hey, I think we're going too fast. Or what are we going to do if the people are moving out? Or why are the buildings so tall on this street? I know it's allowed, but couldn't it be lower? And then people could set parameters, and then in this VR model could be take leaders that are new employees and say, this is what we meant on this street. That's what the whole plan's predicated on, as a reminder. Because I think with plans sitting on a shelf, they get dusty. Oh, this is 20 years old. Oh, let's throw it out. But a VR model might be something that you have to update all the time, and then every community member, you update it frequently, and it evolves with the interests of the community. And then there's Bitcoin and
we're talking a lot about VR in the hands of designers right now, but really there is a false perception that only designers and only architects and individuals who are able to afford the software have access to it. So I want to talk to you all about a little bit about that perception, but who do you think should provide this access to community?
You guys, Open Signal. No, I mean, seriously, community venues that are already welcoming and seen as resources, because I don't think that if it was we think a lot in terms of accessibility, not just in terms of ADA and all that important considerations, but really the invisible walls to access to spaces. And so I think a community center like Open Signal, who has a history of providing access, is a natural place. That is why we are here. And we've been collaborating using the incredible cameras and providing training to community members in media making and oral history. So our stories have been produced by community members who no experience whatsoever in oral history media making. So I don't see why this would be a different process. And I'm actually encouraged by, again, this very short experiment that we did where I never tried anything. I experienced some projects and I never felt this was accessible to my ideas. And I invite you to experience. Again, it's just a few ideas that we try, but I think it's very promising, and I don't see why someone else couldn't come and propose an idea. And where is Matt? He doesn't know. I'm volunteering. Matt, it's wonderful to translate those ideas with the technology.
Rudy, how would you like your community to be able to use VR?
I think, I want to bring back the term immersive technology. We started with it, and I'd like to go back to it, where to come up with something that's based on consensus, that brings so many different perspectives together. It's kind of like this virtual gathering place of ideas. And then to really inhabit that for a moment, like to go and physically into it, is a really powerful way, I think, to perhaps avoid some decisions that could lead to some really negative results. That's one way to put it, and another way is to imagine like what we've never could quite imagine together before. And I think because we've been talking about all these the barriers, like language barriers of design, but also of language itself. If community members don't have are not literally speaking the same language, but instead can be like, wow, proportionally that's like 8 feet. That feels really oppressive. Yeah, I don't want to have that kind of block between me and someone else. Then I think that full-bodied immersive quality can be quite profound, and perhaps not just imagine new ways of designing space, but of designing collaborations, where we don't have to think of this piecemeal or this unnecessarily like conflict points where it's like, oh, you know, as marginalized communities or as people of color, for example, it has to be one story of a marginalized group over the other. So vying for that, for this created sense of scarcity in terms of space. I think it can start to open up and feel a little more boundless and limitless and feel like, oh, there's actually space for more than just one way of looking at it.
Charles, I have a question for you about, do you think that VR can engage to make an overall urban planning and the design process more transparent through this, through the language and through our practice?
I think so, based on my experience working on neighborhood walks, where you know 10 people stood on a corner and they looked at this one site, and we said, boy, that gas station's really in the way, and it doesn't add anything to this community, and all these cars are here. And they said, oh, we should probably keep the gas station. Let's don't get rid of it. And I said, well, what if we put a building on top of the gas station? And they went, oh, that sounds like a great idea. But we don't do that in the United States. I don't even think it's allowed, right? Because of flammable reasons, and you know, it didn't really matter. But the expectation is that, well, we could use it as the gas station, you know, to be nice to the business owner, and then we could transition it to something else. But I think that to the extent that you get people having a conversation that not everything happens at once, that they have a say, that government and institutional memory will change, and they need to be ready to advocate for the things that are important in their lives. And transparency is about a place or a venue where you can point to a couple of relevant precedents that were agreed on by everyone to organize people's activism. And I think that a virtual world can help people find those touchstones, you know, in the community where, you know, the meaning and purpose of all the decisions we've made, or the meaning and purpose now of the decisions we need to roll back. But I think we need to be more dynamic place, and I don't think that it resides just with the mayor's office. I think it relies on community, you know, in a neighborhood or across the district or neighborhoods or quadrants saying, this is what our quadrant's for. Come on, get with the program. Because we like living close to downtown. We like getting to the park. You know, we want to live in this area. So how do we help ourselves do that? Last thing I'll add is that we have a danger in grassroots is just dealing with feelings with no action. And at the grass tops, they're always trying to organize goals. And you know, and like, if we got all our goals together, then this is going to be a great place. Well, no. But the grass tops there is a place where the grass tops and the grassroots meet, and I think VR could be a place that kind of sets a table for that. Could be stories. Because I don't know if there's really been a goal that says, thou shalt meet the expectation of the community's interest. I didn't see that in the statewide planning goals.
Yeah.
You know, it's more like the livability, you know, they're all good, by the way. And we're the only state that has them, so don't go out and throw away the statewide planning goals. But I mean, they could add one, right, that does this.
I have one last question for Jeannie before we're going to actually let Alex take off his goggles and say hello to you all and everything, and talk a little bit about his process as an artist learning that. So while he's getting, or he might not be able to hear us, Kareem. Oh, he's I was like, can he hear us?
Hi.
Hi. No, we're so good. So we'll let you put that down. So before we talk a little bit about Alex's process, Jeannie, what are the next steps? We're talking about action next. What are the next steps and what's the future?
You know, I think right now a lot of things happen in urban design as, you know, we'll build it and people will come. You know, that's what's happening now. Developers kind of come up with ideas with architects and urban designers, right? We go out to the community and we ask them a few times of what they want, but I wonder if the future, data is going to be huge. It's just hitting architecture, I think, a little bit. And what is the value of that in the work that we do as designers and architects in urban design, right? I know that Alphabet, Google's parent company is getting into sort of this realm right now with a project in Toronto called Quayside, and they're really thinking about, they're using technology, generative design tools to come up with iterations of transportation modes. What's that doing in this development? What is the greenhouse gas emissions? They're kind of playing all of these things through an urban design and coming up with solutions, and hopefully a more informed solution. But I think what's sort of missing is, what I haven't heard much about is, can VR be a tool where you can capture the qualitative part of what people, touch and feel and experience in their communities? Those are the important things, and I think that's missing. Data don't necessarily give you that. And is there a way to capture that? Mm-hmm. I am old school. I used to like SimCity. I've never played Second Life, but if we combine those two, is there sort of a program where you can give people agency to develop the community or area, to what they would think would fit their needs, and for designers and architects to look at that and understand better what the needs are. I think, as I said earlier, I think architects are reacting to tools. We're like, oh, this is a really cool tool. We need to learn how to use it. And I think in the future, I think this is happening in architecture school now, is architects need to be proactive and be the designers of the tools themselves that are going to help us create a better process and a more inclusive process. And then the questions are, is what you captured, it's accessibility, like you said earlier. If the tools are not available to a section of the population, then that's not going to be helpful. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in that part. But I think just being more proactive about how we approach our work instead of reacting, I think is what's going to happen in the future. And I think we can make technology do whatever we want, right? Technology doesn't know. We're the ones need to tell the technology what we want from it. Mm-hmm. So I think I'm really optimistic about the future, and I think I see a lot of the young architects in our office taking that initiative and being like, just watching Carrie take on this project. I think there's a lot of energy around architects, young architects. It's not going to be me. I can barely figure out this VR, but I think there's a lot of energy around this that's going to create a really brighter future.
If I can add to that, I was able to visit the Bora model in the other room, and I was so excited that there was a couple pieces of trash that were put in. Because so often around the work with houselessness, if we want to put a village somewhere, then a lot of the outcry is, there's going to be trash, there's going to be trash. Being able just to put someone in, be like, great, where do we want the trash can? Let's pick it up, let's drop it in, done. And next issue.
It's an active.
It was the best analogy. So I was really happy to see that as a potential application.
No, it's awesome. Alex, do you want to talk a little bit about the process? I think it's on, yeah.
Hello? Check.
Yes.
Well, it was an honor to be able to experiment with the technology. I'd never used it before until I was asked to be a part of this panel. And I feel like it was really, really cool to be a part of and to be exposed to. I feel like it's very intuitive. So I'm an illustrator normally, and it seems like I could apply it very, very quickly. And it seems like there's some stuff I need to overcome. Like it still feels a little bit difficult to orient myself to 3 dimensions, and the fact that I'm creating an environment, I just have to see things completely different or approach it like a sculptor. But I can see the potential of it, and I can see how to be able to create art that people can walk through and experience in that way is really amazing. And I think it's going to have a lot of positivity.
Well, we have a few minutes, and what we would really like for you all to do is we have some cards on the seats, and if you have a question, we would love for you to write it down. We'll have some individuals who are going to go around and grab those, and while you're thinking about a question, we would really like to invite you to turn to your neighbor and actually talk to them a little bit about what is the most pressing challenge for your community. And what do you feel? Because there's probably a community member sitting next to a designer and you don't even know it, or vice versa. But what do you think that designers should be seeking, and what do you think that they should be addressing, and how might VR play that role? So please turn to your neighbor and discuss, because this is also about meeting people. And then if you have a question, please write it down and hold it up. And yeah, we'll just go around and ask, or we could just go around and ask. I'm gonna ask a question. People, do you want to just ask a couple questions?
Sure.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna talk to anyone. I'm leaving.
Do you want to ask them for questions? People,
Designers and introverts. So overall, it's a 100%.
It's a deadly. Yeah.
If you just called on designers to go and volunteer, that's the big thing.
Yeah.
Just create volunteer opportunities for people to come out of the office.
Okay.
It's amazing. 'Cause they'll come
I got a
grown,
question for you.
structured.
that's great.
They make some good. They meet somebody who's like them.
For our panelists, we have a question.
This is for our panelists.
It's amazing.
Wow.
But if you don't get
No,
into it,
I think we should keep going.
I think it's volunteerism, right?
Yeah, yeah, that'd be great.
Because they just want to do their job. Right. Cosmos thinkers, right? They make a whole cosmos in their head, and the building's going to be this cosmos, but it doesn't relate to anything.
So interesting.
Okay.
It's kind of
All right, I've got a couple of questions to ask our panelists, and then we're going to keep these conversations going. So thank you for thinking about it, and if anything else comes up, you can talk to any of us at any moment. So the first question from the audience that we have is, how do y'all think that we can measure feedback from audiences who are very new to VR in a way that enhances the design process? I can read that again. How can we measure feedback from audiences who are very new to VR in a way that enhances the design process?
I think you could make some kind of work session. Like if you, let's say you give them some information and you give VR is simplified somewhat. Like I know it's not there yet because Donald Newland, he is a tremendous force for good in modeling the entire city, but you go into his model, it's so detailed. I'm not a gamer, I can't drive it, right? So I mean, it's not about just communicating like the words of planning, but it's like, my sons can do all kinds of things with a joystick. I pick it up and I'm like, I think a lot of people are like that. It has to somehow be playing with it in, pencil-like form, I don't know, some tools that we have.
Can I add to that a bit?
Please do.
I think for me, what's coming up in relation to this question is less of like how the community members can catch up to the design tool, and more about how the design tool can be used in service of what the community expertise is. So you're kind of flipping that question on its head a little bit. I don't know if that made sense. Yeah.
Here's a great question. I mean, They're all great questions, but this is a little bit different. So as mentioned multiple times in the panel, there are so many hoops and players involved in turning ideas into reality. To play a bit of the devil's advocate, how do you prevent VR from becoming a false promise to community members? I think that's a really important question. Anyone want to field that?
I could say something, which is, to me, really looking at VR as a tool, and therefore, what is that tool used for, and who is it used by? I think are some of the underlying questions that, the tool itself can perform a variety of things. But it can, with as much potency that it has for good, it has that much potency for bad as well. And so again, really focusing on how it's used. And an example, right, would be having this just intensive process of community members, maybe learning how to do the joystick stuff and all of this stuff, right? And then they give their feedback, and then ultimately none of that comes to use, and there's broken promises that are documented, and I think that would be an especially kind of big disappointment, and have the detrimental effect of instead of having transparency and building trust, cause more of a severance and separation and distrust of technology and designer and the design field or whatever. Yeah.
I want to go to Jeannie. You look like you have
I feel
something
like
to
I
say.
could add to that. I think, transparency of information, if the model could capture data in a way that allows people to understand, what the output is, I think there's more transparency to what it's capturing, and therefore, we're doing this because 85% of the people wanted this. I think, you'd have to trust the data, obviously, but I think if there's a way to build that trust and have that transparency, then it's really a way to share what you're capturing. I could see, maybe there's, profiles within virtual sort of personalities or something, or agents or something, where you can select what appeals to you, and that's the person that then gets run through a program that actually articulate what happens through the urban environment or something like that. So you're kind of seeing what's happening, you understand what this person's gonna do, and you relate to it. I think part of it is just not understanding how their thoughts get transformed into a design, and that's really, really hard, right? We spent years learning how to do that. And I think for community members to understand how we make decisions, I think will help that issue.
Just to kind of also think of the positive side of this, is that it's not just that we would see, I feel like it's also a place where we can see our own place in decision making, and also our sphere of influence. Mm-hmm. It's a place where it's not just relegating responsibilities to others, but also a place where we see where is our place in this process, where is our sphere of influence, where is that we affect positively or negatively our communities, right? So I feel there is also that. There is again, a place where we can all be there and see where the decisions are made, and where is that we can influence the decisions in a way that is positive for everyone.
That actually is a great segue into our last question, and then I have just a couple words after our last question, so don't all run out yet. So how can immersive technology do more to effectively connect citizens to policymakers? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I have come to the conclusion that if it's not visible and tangible, you can't really build any political will in support of some improvement. So someone has to go out, the city saves a bunch of money by employing a bunch of smart city technology. You don't see the money. hooray, right? But I think that the visible, tangible component of VR, as it represents the place we want to be, can make political will and can change things. And that's why I'm all for making everything visible and tangible. Like if you have a policy that's not visible and tangible, make it visible and tangible somehow. And the best one is the bicycle routes aligned with stormwater. Like where all the bike routes are, because they paid for the bike routes with the stormwater improvements and made crossings and things like that. And at first people were like, wait a minute, what the hell are they doing on my street? They're working on my street? And they wouldn't understand. But when it was built and it saw it as a concept, and it was meaningful and purpose in their life, then it was like, oh, it's not so bad. The city should be doing this, right? Yeah, okay. Costs a little bit more, fine. I like it. Who wants a beer? It has to get to that, prosaic component, but it needs something visible and tangible that people can hook onto.
I think there's there's a huge spectrum of what happens between what exists, what used to exist, what might exist, and where exactly VR can play into that in terms of policy might be where it's not so much about design, it's about kind of having a physical representation of the voices. So imagine that there was a VR of the Portland building while things were being figured out with that, and people could anybody could go in and kind of add on the building in virtual space their thoughts on it, right? Their feedback, what it means to them, what they think. Well, that would be very different in terms of if somebody then walks around that in virtual space. It's not about the design. It's not about, it's just simply adding voices in a way that's physical and that adds up, that can't be ignored. And that is transparent in a way that someone walking in with a clipboard, what do you think about this, and walking away isn't. So I think that that might get response versus a proposal, right? Once there's the consensus about, okay, all right, we can't ignore what we're hearing, now what? Yeah.
Those are great responses to some really awesome questions, and I appreciate everyone's engagement. A lot of work went into this event. A lot of people put a lot of work into this event. And in a couple minutes, we're thanking our panelists, and we're going to clear out of this space and get Bora's exhibit set back up in here, and you'll be able to check out Vanport Mosaic's exhibit in Studio B. But before we get to that, I really do want to share for a moment why OpenSignal is so important to me personally. I grew up mostly in Egypt, which is a country that doesn't have freedom of speech or freedom of the press or freedom of assembly, and media is a heavily controlled and censored thing. And the idea of a community media center, a place like this where people can come together and have access to professional expertise or state-of-the-art technology, and most importantly, the ability to document and share their own stories, wouldn't be allowed to exist in my hometown, Cairo. And I've asked myself the question, why? And then I realized that this event wouldn't have been possible and these incredible people wouldn't have converged with these tools to have this conversation without the infrastructure and resources of OpenSignal, which is actually all of our Community Media Access Center. And at a time when divisiveness runs rampant in our society, and spaces that foster meaningful dialogue seem harder and harder to find, this is actually a really powerful place. I look around the room and I see people who are artists, designers, producers, activists, journalists, and we're all able to be here tonight because this place exists. And we're not here to sell a product either. I mean, OpenSignal is here purely to serve this community and to prioritize service to those who have been historically marginalized and underrepresented, which is a mission that I feel very passionately about. At the same time, like community media centers across the country, we face threats to our funding, capital funding specifically, thanks to this administration's FCC, which is the same one that repealed net neutrality, and cable and internet service providers that are pushing really hard to put their profits over equitable access. Actually, OpenSignal has seen a significant reduction in our capital funding year over year. And that is the money that goes directly to making this equipment available and maintaining these studios for public access and for people to be able to use them. Thankfully, though, the decision to support and sustain community access is not just in the hands of the FCC or cable companies. I wouldn't want anything else in Comcast's hands. The decision is actually in our hands. It's in my hands, and it's in all of your hands. That's why I contribute to this organization. And I contribute because I want conversations like this to continue to be possible. I want people to continue to have access to a space where discourse and creativity and democracy are sustained in our city. So you should have found an annual report on your seats when you came in, and inside that annual report, you'll find an envelope. I'm inviting you to join me in supporting the work that happens here by making a contribution tonight. Every dollar, whether it's $5 or $15 or $50, makes a huge impact in what we're able to do. Again, your contribution is what sustains this organization. Rebecca is in the back of the room, and Rebecca can take those envelopes from you. And Marina is at the front desk, and she can take any credit card donations that you want to make. But you also get the perk, any contribution that you make, of becoming a card-carrying member of OpenSignal, which makes it so that you can get trained on any of our equipment, certified on any of our equipment, and you can come here and you can make a TV show, and you can check out equipment and do documentaries, and you can be the community activist or engage in the work of your community members in the way that you want with access to these resources. It's a really powerful place, and I believe so strongly in it. So I thank you for anything that you contribute, and I thank you for being here. I thank all of our panelists for being here, and everyone who built the exhibits that you're about to see. This is our community, this is our city, this is our place. So go and grab some beer, get some wine, keep the conversation going, come and talk to our panelists, come and talk to us, talk to any member of OpenSignal's staff. We're here to serve you, and enjoy the rest of your evening. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I gotta go through the